I'm Liz Hirsh Naftali, and welcome to the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. And I am really excited today because I have an amazing leader, and we get to talk with him about heart and humanity in home, and not about politics and policy, but really about what brings us all together as humans. And my goal is that in this podcast that we get to learn about who our leaders are for who they are as people, and that we find what brings us together and what we share in common. And so this is my way of an introduction of Senator Raphael Warnock from the great state of Georgia, who is also Reverend Warnock from Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. So I want to say welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Liz. Great to be here with you.
Thank you. And so I was thinking like what brought us in common, and not about politics, but as humans. And I was doing a little bit of research on you, and I read about your father and about his service in World War II. And my father also joined the service. He was in the United States. But I looked at these two men and I thought these two men, very different, but they both were men who needed something. My father was poor. He didn't have anything. He was looking for a job. He was looking for an education. And that's what he got in the Army. And I think that your father also had a similar experience. And so for me, I thought, okay, here we are, the children of these two incredible men. And my father was an incredible man. And your father sounds like he was really incredible. And so that's what I thought was just a nice way to introduce you and to talk about what we have in common.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Good to be with you. My father had an incredible impact on me and my growth and development as a man. It's really difficult to overstate it. I had an older father. He was 52 years old when I was born. And he was, like your dad, a part of the greatest generation, those who were World War II era veterans. My dad served only about a year in the Army, all stateside, but he had an incredible work ethic. I often say that he used to wake me up literally every morning, 7 days a week during the school year, during the summer. And my dad, who was a small businessman and a preacher, it seemed to me, preached the same sermon every morning. Get up, get dressed, put your shoes on. And you didn't sleep late in his house. It was that work ethic, that grit and commitment to family and responsibility that's been my North Star.
Well, my father also brought me to work on any weekend, any holiday. I mean, child labor laws did not exist, and I was working very young as well. And I look back now, and I'm very grateful for what he gave to me. So thank you for sharing that. So talk a little bit about, I mean, you can see that you were one of 12 children, and that you grew up with these incredible parents. What was it like? Not what I can Google, but what can you tell us about what it meant to be 11th child out of 12, I believe, but just the craziness and the beauty of all the kids together?
Well, we were what most people call, or a lot of people call, a blended family. But honestly, we never thought about it in that way. Both my mother and father had been married before, and so they each brought children to the marriage. And that marriage only produced 2 children, but there were 12 of us because we never thought of ourselves as half brothers or half sisters. We were all siblings. There's a huge age difference. My dad was significantly older than my mother, so my eldest siblings could be my parents. But there was a lot of love, not much money, not a lot of resources, but a lot of love, a lot of laughter, deep faith. And they poured that into me. And so even though I grew up in poverty, I feel like in a real sense, I hit the jackpot. I had parents who poured their faith into me. I often say that my mother, who grew up in Waycross, Georgia, picking cotton and picking tobacco as a teenager in the 1950s, used to speak to me in King James English. And, they were both preachers. And so, the language of the Bible, the sense of faith that comes from the Hebrew prophets, and Jesus, who centered the poor, that was alive and well in my family. My mom, thou shalt wash the dishes, lest I smite thee with my rod and my staff. But it was that kind of deep faith and sense of duty and yet levity and laughter. I think that has served me well in this crazy world of politics, where the change that I want for ordinary people comes very slow and hard. It comes in moments where you don't expect, and then there are moments when you have setbacks. But it's been that faith that's guided me in my work to this very day.
It's a good thing to think about because politics is slow.
Right.
It is for the people that you are doing this. I ask each time to the different leaders, you had a lot of education and you went through a lot of different schools. Do you have a teacher or a specific administrator or somebody that like saw you young and was there for you? And to this day, you still think back, thankfully, I had that teacher in my life.
Yeah, I'm number 11 out of 12 in my family, and I'm the first college graduate. But it was my folks who poured that into me. In high school, I had great teachers. I'm thinking right now of my high school principal, Gwen Goodman. She had been a biology teacher in her early days of her career at that same school. When I came through, she was the principal. And she was this little diminutive woman, maybe no more than 5 feet tall. But I can see her now in my mind's eye, standing there as we walked into the school early in the morning. And she was standing there with her arms folded. And although she was a small woman, she had so much presence and power. She was no nonsense, but
Yeah.
you knew every kid in that school by name, and you didn't mess with Miss Goodman. One of the things that captured my imagination, quite honestly, was her vocabulary. She had a love of words. When she spoke, people paid attention. That helped to spark in me a love for language and words. And of course, my dad and mom both preachers, and so I try to bring that commitment to stories and telling stories that help us to see ourselves in a different light, not only for who we are, but who we could become. People like Gwen Goodman inspired me.
The fact that she saw you and she saw children, so children felt they were seen and heard,
Yeah.
is really so much part of the education and so much part of our development, and little and powerful at the same time. So also you studied philosophy and divinity, and that's where you came to being a leader. And I think that's really an interesting place because so many people come to leadership through law school or business school, or they study government, and you really studied people and you studied who people were and also through the divine. And just for a moment, can you talk about what that brings, how you look at what you're doing in the world of trying to help people?
So I had incredible parents, incredible role models, but there was somebody else who's always been present in a strange way in my life, even though I was born a year after his death, and that's Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King inspires a lot of people throughout our country, all across the world. But let me tell you, he absolutely captured my imagination as a kid. I don't know why. I was just obsessed with Dr. King. There was something about the power of his voice. And he was a preacher like my parents and like my dad, who, as I was growing up, was leading a church. And I love the way he used his faith, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Not as a cudgel to beat people down, but as a tool to lift people up, to give us a vision of who we might become. And I can tell you that I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta because somewhere I read that he had attended Morehouse College. In fact, I came across something that said that as a student, Martin Luther King Jr. came across H.D. Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience. He read that as a young teenager, really, because he entered at age 15 at Morehouse College. So then I got curious because no one in my family had graduated from college. I was, what is this Morehouse College? I went to that school because that's the school that Dr. King attended. Never in my wildest imagination that I know that years after graduating from Dr. King's school, I would come to be the pastor of his church, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where I still serve and I return every week and continue to preach and lead that church, even as I do the work that I do in the Senate. For me, it's a running moral train between the faith community, the work I do here in the Congress. It's what keeps me grounded. I often say that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. I'm a pastor in the Senate. But I think whether you went to divinity school or law school, we need moral leaders. This is a moral moment in our country. This is a moment when we are being asked, like previous generations of Americans, what is the character of the country that we are trying to build? Who are we really as Americans, and who are we for one another? That's the lens through which I look at every piece of legislation and try to answer the very complex questions that come across my desk.
Well, I will admit in this moment that I went 2 years ago to hear you speak. You did a sermon at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem 2 years ago. And it's almost, I double checked it, it's like almost 2 years ago to the day we're speaking. I was inspired by you that day. I was inspired by the congregation and the singing and the joy, but I was inspired by you because you talked, and we're not going to have time for it, but I'm saying this so people can go Google this and listen to it, because you talked from the book of Joshua and you talked about the courage to be, and you went, and it's beautiful. I'm not going to let anyone know about it. I'm just going to tell them it's beautiful and they should go listen. But it ended with the part about Ruby Bridges. And you talked about what this child, what she went through, but what she was thinking in her head, and that moral moment of where she went and who she became. And I say that because you inspired me, because I've had rough days. I've had tough times, especially in the last year and a half. And I think about some of the messages. So I want you to know that while I am having you here because this is my podcast and I think it's important, I need to tell you personally that you inspired me. And so, I want to say thank you, because usually I say to people, like, what's your best advice? What's your worst advice? Or and my advice to people is to listen to that sermon at this time. It was
Well,
2 years ago,
well,
but it's
thank you for
appropriate.
that, and I do remember that sermon because I worked on staff at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem while I was a student in seminary in New York, and it was a moment for that congregation in the months after its pastor, who had mentored me, passed away, Dr. Calvin Butts. But the reason I like that story about Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old who integrates this school in New Orleans, and it's captured in that classic painting, right, by Norman Rockwell, and she's being escorted in the school, a 6-year-old, by U.S. Marshals. And I think about that because then I was the father of a 6-year-old daughter who's now 8. As we talk today, I'm the father of her brother who's a 6-year-old now. And I'll be honest, I don't know that I would put my children, what a decision for these parents to make. It's one thing for me to put myself in harm's way, but the courage, the vision, the foresight that we're going to have her face down this ugliness, and literally adults yelling epithets at a kid as she's walking into the school, and she transformed America in the process. That gives me hope, because these are grim times, and I know that folks are looking to me and folks like me who are working on the Hill to try to facilitate change. But let me tell you, change doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up. It's the Ruby Bridges of the world who create the context for the change that we want to see at the top. But not only her, Viola Luiso, a white woman who was the wife of a Detroit Teamster Union member who was killed in the dark days of fighting for voting rights. I think about Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, 2 Jews and an African American who also lost their lives in those dark days. And then those who just kept walking the walk, talking the talk. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said that when he marched alongside Dr. King, he felt like his legs were praying. And so for those who are asking, what should you be doing in this moment? Get moving, move
Yeah.
your feet. There's an African proverb that says, when you pray, move your feet. And so even if you're not sure the exact direction, and we ought to do the strategy, we ought to think seriously about what to do, but don't ever be frozen by what I call the paralysis of analysis. Get moving, show up. People in power need to know that the folks at the grassroots are paying attention and that we are watching, because that's what folks who are demagogues, folks who want to be dictators, they want to weaponize despair in such a way that you don't even bother to stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself. You have more power than you think.
So I'm going to say yes and amen. And people got to get power into their own hands. I am with you. And there's a lot of people that are out there and really are fighting and really want to see a better world for themselves and their children. And I think that's what we are called to do just as humans. I'm going to do 180-degree change, which is just to end with these rapid questions I have for all the leaders. But no, the reason, and you're laughing, but I think it's like, what it does is it's like, yes, you have just given us this moral clarity, but at the end of the day, you're just like all of us, which is you got favorite things and you've got simple things that we can all relate to. So where we started, we're going to sort of come back to, which is quick questions to get to know Raphael Warnock. They're really good ones and not easy ones.
I'm nervous, but let's play.
Okay, yeah. Shaking in your shoes. Favorite sound?
Favorite sound? Earth, Wind, and Fire. The greatest group ever.
Okay. Favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite scent or smell?
Citrus. It's a nice smell and it wakes me up.
And who is your biggest cheerleader?
My mom. She's 86 years old. She was my biggest cheerleader my whole life. Now, her strength is very, very weak. She has dementia in the early stages. And yet, amidst the fog of being in and out, when I go home to Savannah, sit next to Mom, she's encouraging her youngest son. It warms my heart. It breaks my heart to see this happen. A lot of folks are going through that struggle. And yet, I'm encouraged by her story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Favorite meal?
This is how you know I'm a country boy from Savannah, Georgia. Turkey wings.
What would your dessert be, your favorite dessert?
Key lime pie.
And what is your favorite household chore?
I don't know. I just like to organize things. Like if it's a mess, I just like things organized, and they're not always organized. But I was that kid in seminary and in grad school. The papers literally due the next day, but I had to clean up my whole apartment so my mind wouldn't be so cluttered and I could sit down and write the paper.
Okay. Favorite sports team?
The Atlanta Falcons.
And we know your favorite music. And do you have an exercise? Do you have time to exercise with everything, with kids and with work and with life?
Yes, I try to exercise, stay healthy. My favorite exercise is getting on my bike. It's a nice little road bike and built for speed and efficiency. And you might catch me on the Beltline or on the Silver Comet Trail any day in Atlanta.
Yeah, and I'm sure to clear your head as well. I'm going to ask this one more question, then I'm going to, before my final, just more to get to know you. What is your superpower? I mean, throughout this, we've heard a lot about who you are, but what would you say is your superpower?
I don't know. What I try to be present for folks. You know, I've had years of practice with that as a pastor and somehow have people feel that I'm present. Often in this business of politics, change is hard, it's slow. More often than not, I can't get people what they need in the moment. I think folks need to feel you're walking beside them even as you're working for them. And that's what I try to do.
And it comes from a place of being, you have to be courageous, which you are, but you have to be compassionate. And it's interesting how you carry that and see where you're going, so that even though you can get pushed along the side, you know that where you're going is what's best for your people and for yourself. So my last question, in respect to your time, and I know you got to go out and get some other work done.
This has been great. But the ministry of presence is what I call it. And it's something that I worked on, you know, I mean, at funerals, you can't undo what the family is facing. And even though I preach a eulogy, it's not the words, it's being present. And I submit that in this dark and difficult moment in our country, one of the best things we can do is to be fully present for one another, fully present for all of us. Across the divisions that folks are trying to create, find a way to be fully present, not just with your tribe, with your family, do that, but expand those circles of solidarity. That's how we get through this moment.
Yeah, and I believe in that very much because of this podcast, speaking with Democrats, Republicans, different religions, different beliefs. And at the same time, if we can find commonality, that's also a great place to start, so that we can see that really we have a lot more in common. And if we work together and we are present for each other, we don't always have to agree, but at least we have common, we're humans to one another. So for me, I know who you are, and I aspire to keep trying to do that work through this podcast and through my day-to-day life. And I hope others from listening to this will feel that power to continue, because I believe people do it. I'm going to ask you my last question. And this one is, what brings Raphael Warnock joy? And if he is joyful and feels joy, how does that joy share? How does he share that joy? And what does that joy mean to others? We've talked about it, but just in the lens of joy.
This is easy. My 2 little children are what bring me joy. It's the hardest, most joyful job I have ever had. They're 8 and 6, and they make me laugh, and they help me not to take myself too seriously.
When you are with them and after you're with them, I'm sure it really gives you the strength to get through the week, get through the times, and even probably in the darkest moments, you can just think to yourself, my children.
Being away from them so much is tough, but when I'm with them, it reminds me of why I do this work. It's about the world I want them to live in.
On that one, I'm just going to say amen. I'm going to say thank you. And thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for what you do for our country, for your children, and for all the children. I think at the end of the day, most of what we want to do is make sure that this is a better place and a better world for all of them, for all of us, but for our future and for the children. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in person. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Hi, it's Liz. Please join me every Tuesday for coffee to talk about heart and humanity with our elected leaders. Remember to hit subscribe to get an alert when a new episode is live and for exclusive content. Ciao!